London, the summer of 1851. The city has gathered the great players of the world for the very first international tournament, but this game is not part of it. It is a casual game played for fun during a break between a gentle German schoolteacher named Adolf Anderssen and a Parisian master named Lionel Kieseritzky, and it will become the most famous game in all of chess. If a quiet game like this is how you'd like to fall asleep, take a moment to subscribe. There's a new one each week. Anderssen taught mathematics for his living, a quiet man who would go on to win that whole great tournament. Across from him, Kieseritzky, well known and well respected, who lived and played his chess in Paris. This was the romantic age of chess, when players prized a beautiful attack far above a safe little point. And in this game, Anderssen gave away almost everything. A bishop, then both of his rooks, and, at the last, his queen. With only a few small pieces remaining, he delivered checkmate. Kieseritzky was so delighted by it that he sent the moves to his friends in Paris, and soon the whole world was calling it immortal. And so it has remained for more than 170 years. So let your eyes close now and let the board take shape in the dark 64 squares, the pieces in their places, waiting. It begins, as so many great games do, with a single step. White pushes the king's pawn 2 squares forward to e4. Black answers in kind, the pawn to e5. 2 pawns face to face in the center, neither one willing to give way. And now white makes the old daring offer. The f-pawn leaps up to f4, right beside its neighbor. This is the king's gambit. White holds out a pawn like bait and asks black to take it. The price is the safety of white's own king. The reward, if black accepts, is speed and open lines and fire down the middle. Black accepts. The e-pawn captures on f4. So one white pawn is gone, and a black pawn now sits deep in white's camp on f4. White does not stop to win it back. The light bishop slides out to c4. See where it looks down the long diagonal straight at f7. f7, the square just in front of black's king, guarded by that king alone. The bishop has chosen its target early. And here black strikes with the boldest move on the board. The queen swings all the way out to h4. Check. A check, thrown at a king that has not yet moved a step. White cannot block it, and would not want to. The king simply steps aside to f1. It is safe enough for the moment, but something has quietly been given up. That king will never castle now. It must stay where it stands, and learn to look after itself. Black's queen rides high on h4, far from home, full of menace. And now black makes an offer of his own. The b-pawn advances 2 squares to b5. It steps right into the path of white's bishop, daring it to capture. A gambit answered by a gambit, a pawn given up to pull the bishop off its diagonal, away from f7. White takes it. The bishop captures on b5. A small lead in material for white now, but the bishop has been lured to the edge, and that takes time. Black develops, unhurried and exact. The knight comes to f6. From f6 it eyes e4, white's proud center pawn, and asks a hard question of it. White answers by bringing out a knight of his own. The king's knight goes to f3. And notice, from f3 it reaches up and attacks the black queen on h4. The queen, so bold a moment ago, has to move. She slips back a single square to h6. Tucked into the corner, she still guards that pawn on f4, her little trophy. Let the whole board take shape for a moment. White's king stands on f1, just off its home square, the rook still beside it in the corner. White has a bishop far out on b5, on the queen side, and a knight on f3 in the heart of the board. Black's king sits at home on e8, not yet castled either. The black queen leans into the corner. At h6, a knight rests on f6. And that stubborn black pawn still sits on f4, deep in white's half, splitting the kingside wide. The whole position hums, both kings a little bare, the game leaning hard toward attack. White plays a small, modest move. The pawn to d3. It opens a window for the dark bishop and quietly braces the pawn on e4. Black, too, reaches for the edge of the board. The knight swings out to h5. From the rim it shields the f4 pawn and dreams of leaping into g3. Now white sends a knight on a journey. The knight on f3 hops to the edge, to h4. It is bound for a 5, a beautiful outpost, but here the leap is a touch too eager. The stronger, quieter path was to lift the rook to g1 first and prepare the kingside without haste. That rook lift would have kept everything coiled and ready. The knight's jump lets black seize a moment instead. And black seizes it. The queen comes to g5. From g5 she menaces the wandering knight on h4 and stands watchful over the whole kingside. White will not retreat. The knight presses on. To f5 it goes, the very outpost it set out for. A bold horse, planted deep, staring at g7 right beside the black king. Cannot be shooed away easily, and it haunts the dark squares around black's home. Black turns his attention to the bishop still sitting on b5. The pawn to c6, attacking it, asking the bishop to declare itself. White answers not by saving the bishop, but by grabbing space. The g-pawn pushes 2 squares to g4. The black knight on h5, and at the same time it guards the proud knight on f5. Now look at the strain. Black's knight on h5 is attacked, and white's bishop on b5 is attacked, both at once. Tension stretched right across the width of the board. Black's knight steps back out of danger. It returns home to f6. See the board as it stands, just before the next turn. White's king still waits on f1. In the far corner, the rook has yet to move. A white knight stands proud and deep on f5. A pawn sits forward on g4. The light bishop lingers on b5, under fire. Black's king is still at home on e8. The queen rides high on g5. A black knight rests once more on f6, and that old pawn still bites on f4. Everything is wound tight. One side is about to commit. And white makes the quiet move that sets the trap. The rook lifts from the corner to g1. It steps onto the open g-file behind its own pawn, and it does something far more cunning. It calmly leaves the bishop to its fate. White is saying, take my bishop on b5 if you wish. I have other plans. For the rook on g1 and the pawn on g4 now lean together against the black queen on g5, ready to push her about. And here black reaches out and takes the bishop. The c-pawn captures on b5. A whole piece is won. To the eye, black is the one who is ahead. But this is the slip the game will remember. The stronger move was to leave the bishop alone and play the pawn to h5, to hit white's pawn on g4 and break the gathering storm before it could form. That patient defense would have kept the queen out of harm and turned the extra piece into something that lasts. Instead, the queen sits on g5 with nowhere peaceful to go. White's pawn can come to h4 and shove her, then on to h5, winning time with every push. Each step a tempo, each tempo a brick in the attack White has been waiting to build. So Black holds the extra piece in his hand, and White holds something else entirely: the open lines, the loose black queen, and a plan already taking shape. White turns toward the king side now, where the queen stands exposed, and begins. White reaches out a hand. The pawn beside the king lifts and steps 2 squares forward to h4. It is a small lunge with a sharp purpose. It pokes at the black queen, who has settled on g5. Move along, it says. You cannot stay. And the queen agrees. She slides down to g6, keeping her watch over the king side. White pushes again, the same pawn onto h5. Now it touches the queen a second time on g6. Again she must choose a square. Back she goes to g5, the post she just left, as if circling the same warm spot. Watch what White does now. The queen lifts from d1 and travels out to f3. She takes the long light diagonal and the open f-file, eyeing the dark business ahead. There is a quiet threat folded inside this move, and Black feels it. The black knight that stood on f6 steps backward, all the way home to g8. It is a retreat. The knight uncrowds the queen and guards the soft squares near the king. But it is also a knight gone quiet, tucked in the corner, far from the fight. Now White collects. The dark bishop swings out and takes the loose pawn on f4. And in the same breath, that bishop stares straight at the black queen on g5. She is attacked, so she moves down to f6, where she leans on the long dark diagonal. From f6 she looks toward b2, toward the sleeping rook in White's corner. White brings the last knight to life, out to c3. Plain, useful development. Black answers by sliding the dark bishop out to c5, aiming it at the empty g1 corner. Here a colder modern eye sees a softer line. It would rather Black played the queen to c6. That quieter move would have steadied things, kept the king's road home a little clearer. Instead, the bishop on c5 reaches for ambition, and ambition is what White wants from him. Let the board settle in your mind for a moment. White's king still sits on f1, with a rook beside it on g1 and a rook asleep on a1. Black's king stands on its home square, e8 not yet castled, still in the middle. White's pieces lean forward, queen on f3, bishop on f4, knight on c3, pawn spearing up the h-file. Black has grabbed material and space on the queen side, but its king side is bare, and its king is exposed. Everything is tense, leaning, waiting for one side to commit. And White commits. The knight leaps from c3 to d5. It lands in the center with a fork of threats. It attacks the queen on f6 and eyes the squares around the black king. Now Black makes a fateful choice. Instead of tending to the danger, the queen dives to b2. She snaps off the pawn there and turns her glare on the sleeping rook in the corner, a 1. It is greedy, and yet by the cold count of modern analysis, it is even the strongest try. Black is winning a war of pieces, far across the board, while the king is left to fend for itself. This is the heart of the famous game, one player counting captures, the other weaving a net. White plays the bishop to d6. It is a strange, beautiful gesture. The bishop steps deep into Black's camp and simply sits. It blocks the d-pawn, it freezes the bishop on c5, and it dreams of the dark squares by the king. Here, truthfully, a colder eye frowns. It would rather white had played the rook to e1. That calmer move kept everything bound together. Bishop to da6 lets black off the hook, if black sees it. And black does not see it. The bishop on c5 reaches out and takes the rook on g1. Another piece swallowed. The material gap yawns wider still. But this, too, is now seen as a slip. There was something sharper. Black could have taken the corner rook with check first. Queen takes a 1, check, seizing the move and the initiative. Instead, black took the nearer rook without check and handed white one free precious breath. White uses it. The center pawn pushes to e5. Quiet as it looks, that pawn slams the door. It walls the black queen away from the kingside, far from her king. From here on, black's army on the queenside is a crowd at the wrong end of the house. Now black takes the last rook, queen to a 1, with check. White's king is in check, and black has feasted 2 rooks, a bishop, a clutch of pawns. By any playing count, black is enormously ahead, and it will not matter at all. White simply walks the king up to e2, stepping out of check. See how little white has left: a queen on f3, 2 knights, the bishop deep on d6, and a few pawns. But every one of those pieces points at the black king. That is the whole secret. Black's king on e8 needs help, and soon. And here comes the final misstep. The knight in the corner. No, the other one. The queenside knight jumps to a 6. A modern eye winces here. It wanted the bishop on c8 to come to a 6 instead. With the bishop on a 6, black could have covered the key escape square by the king and clung on. But the knight went to a 6, to the rim, where it guards nothing that matters now. Let the whole board take its final shape in your mind. This is the picture just before the end. Black's king stands on e8, hemmed in by its own men. On c8, the light bishop. On d7, a pawn. On f7, another pawn. On g8, the lone knight. Far away, black's queen sits triumphant on a 1, with the dark bishop beside her on g1, winners of a battle that no longer counts. And white? The king on e2, the queen poised on f3, the bishop planted on d6. A knight commanding the center from d5, covering c7 and e7 and f6. And a knight on f5, the spear point, leaning toward the bare squares around the black king. 3 small white pieces against a whole army, but the 3 are pointed like a dagger, and the army is asleep in the corner. Now it begins. The knight on f5 springs to g7, with check. It grabs the pawn there and gives the king a shove. The black king must move. It cannot go to f8 or d8 while that knight covers the way. No, it steps aside to d8. The king walks off its home square onto d8, drawn toward the waiting bishop on d6. And now the move the whole world remembers. White's queen, the last great piece, the one thing of real value white owns, lifts from f3. She flies the length of the board and lands on f6. Check. She offers herself. She sits 1 square from nothing, defended by nothing, simply daring black to take. And black must take. The knight on g8 is the only thing that can answer the check. Knight takes queen on f6. Feel why this works. The queen on f6 checks the king on d8, striking down the dark diagonal. Black could not run. Every flight square is sealed by white's own little pieces or blocked by black's own crowd. Black could not capture with the king, too far away. Only the corner knight could reach f6. So the knight takes the queen, and in taking her, the knight leaves the square it was guarding. It was the entire point of the sacrifice, to pull the last defender off its post. The knight that retreated to G8 long ago, the piece that fled the fight, is dragged forward to do the one thing that loses. Now the board is utterly still, and white plays the quietest move of all. The bishop steps from d6 to e7. No capture, no fanfare. It simply touches down beside the black king and says, "This is the end." Checkmate. Let us see why the king cannot breathe. The bishop on e7 gives the check right against the king on d8. Take it? The king cannot. The knight on d5 guards e7. The bishop is protected. Run to c7? The same knight on the 5 covers c7. That door is shut. Run to e8? The knight on g7 watches e8. That door is shut too. Step to d7. Black's own pawn stands there. To c8, black's own bishop fills the square. Every escape is sealed, half by white's 3 small pieces, half by black's own untouched army. And nothing can come between bishop and king. The check is from 1 square away. So the king stands trapped on d8, surrounded by its riches, with no square left in all the world. White gave away both rooks. White gave away the bishop's twin. White gave away the queen herself. And mated with a lone bishop and 2 knights, while the enemy queen sat idle in the far corner. That is why, long after, players still call this the Immortal One. Not because of what was won, but because of what was so gladly given away. The board is finished now. The kings can stop their counting. The bishop rests on e7. The knights stand guard. The pieces will not move again. Let the picture soften and go dim, square by square, until only the warm dark is left. The game is over. Let it rest. The board is still now. The last move has been made, and nothing more is asked of it. Let the pieces soften where they stand, the kings and the pawns going quiet in the dark. The squares lose their edges. Black and white blur into one warm, shapeless grey. There is nothing left to watch for. No threat, no defense, no move to find. The game is finished, and it will keep, perfect and complete, exactly as it was played. Let it go now. The board fades, and the room grows dark around you. Your thoughts can slow to match it, one quiet breath after another. Nothing more to follow, only the dark and the soft weight of rest. Sleep well. Good night.